Hello. This is the final part in the neonatal jaundice presentations. This is about exchange transfusion for neonatal jaundice. This is a final and concluding part of the jaundice series. I am Dr. Karthikeyan, consultant neonatologist, and I have a YouTube channel, which is sort of focus channel, not many literally unimportant topics. They are very focused topics. Core neonatology as procedure videos on MIST, minimally invasive surfactant therapy. And there are two further series which I've done before, blood sampling in units and this jaundice series. Some other focus series will come. It's NeoG Heal Day Babies, and here is the link to join my channel here. Right, this one, please subscribe to my channel. If you search for NeoG Heal Day Babies, in my photo, you will get this channel. So let's proceed with this exchange transfusion for neonatal jaundice. Whenever you update, it's not that I am educating the people who are watching the video. I myself get additional knowledge. So medicine is an everlasting field. Every time you read an update, you get points which are still very interesting and novel. Let's start. Here, you see, believe it or not, it's been news to youngsters because we are so much used to seeing the lights in the NICU that exchange transfusion is now rarely performed because there's no need for it so often. But going by the history of treatment for neonatal jaundice, you will see that exchange transfusion through the umbilical vein was first performed by Diamond in 1948. And it was the only accepted treatment for neonatal jaundice until the advent of phototherapy in 1965. It's in 1965 only that this phototherapy was invented and was adopted into clinical practice. And why it was adopted in clinical practice in exchange transfusion rates came down because of the advent of RH immunoglobulin, the clock in 1966. So a clear, must say 2 decades later only, phototherapy came into clinical practice. Do you believe it? That exchange transfusion was the only treatment available for pathological neonatal jaundice in as recent as 60 years before. Now, here, bilirubin vigintophobia. Many of you will not be aware of the term vigintophobia. I'll tell you, vigintophobia is being mortally afraid of a value of 20. This was discussed very well in this article, 1980. We all had during your training period this vigintophobia because you'll be monitoring the serum bilirubins. There are no transcutaneous or other simple techniques for estimation of bilirubin. Either a spun centrifuge run bilirubin and the calorimeter, or a serum bilirubin, which will normally take 2 ml of blood for each test. So at any point of time, if you don't repeat, suddenly you will find a value jumping about 20. So then we'll arrange for exchange transfusion because those days phototherapy was available, but only ordinary phototherapy, non-available high intensity phototherapy, and exchange transfusion. I told you it was the first available treatment for neonatal jaundice. And definitely treatment because you are bringing down the bilirubin, you are removing the neurotoxins, and the risk of you getting neurotoxicity is almost eliminated if you do an exchange transfusion because the levels fall rapidly. And Kramer's dermal ictus zones was the clinical wave assessment. At those times, there was no transcutaneous bilirubinometer. So anything more than 20 is equivalent to a clinical picture of palms and sole staining, and this, when breached on the upper side, leads to kernicterus. So that the fear of 20, otherwise vigintophobia. So there were many bottlenecks were there. Laboratory turnover on time, sample collections, sending, setting the laboratory. There was no autoanalysis or these rapid analyzing techniques of those days. Lack of simple but say reliable bilirubin test. And then once you decide for exchange, executions of that. Blood bank procedures, equipment, trained personnel, informed consent. And the risk for the procedure goes for days when even running HIV test in the blood, getting kits for that was difficult. So in the meantime, when you explain and get this consent, unavoidable progression will happen before you initiate and complete the procedure, which will lead to kernicterus. So that's where the high intensity phototherapy, when it available, even if a baby is preparing for exchange, this will prevent the bilirubin levels from shooting above and reaching an neurotoxic range. A 25 milligram bilirubin is a sort of, it's a borderline beyond which neurotoxicity will happen. At 30 milligram bilirubin, 30, the value of 30, note it. 30 is always associated, almost always 30, almost always the value of 30 almost 30 30 will lead to neurodevelopmental impairment due to bilirubin. Next slide we go. So bilirubin encephalopathy can be an acute bilirubin encephalopathy. The clinical signs are very non-specific early phase, lethargy and poor sucking. The only a bit of reliable clinical picture, high pitch cry. In fact, people used to record the cry of the babies with the audiometer or bedside speaker phones and then replay it to the consultant whether it is high pitch cry or not. So recognition of the early neurotoxic signs to prepare for exchange transfusion. And if you leave at that stage, sunsetting side, official tonus and retrocolis, tone abnormalities will happen. And then later stages of established equilibrium may have seizures as well. Infants who manifest hypertonia almost always develop chronic encephalopathy. Obviously, when you go for chronic encephalopathy due to bilirubin, you're landing up with the sequelae. The tetrad of chronic encephalopathy is kernicterus, the icterus staining of the basal ganglia. The clinical correlation is the official tonus retrocolis, the tone abnormalities, hypotonia extensor group of the muscles. Once that is there, you have missed the treatment bus. See the picture of the tetrad of bilirubin. So this is staining. You can see the yellow staining. This is the bilirubin staining here of the basal ganglia, the one which controls the posture and the tone above the cerebellum. Cerebellum also is stained bilirubin. So you get extrapyramidal disturbances, especially choreoathetosis and chorea. Auditory dysfunction, sensory neuronal hearing loss is irreversible. Gaze abnormalities, dental enamel hypoplasia, yellow staining of the enamel. This was irreversible. So you end up with a baby having dyskinetic cerebral palsy. In a term neonate, cerebral palsy is due to two insults mainly. One is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy and other one is the bilirubin. So two neurotoxic villains in term babies, commonest ones, asphyxia with HIE and bilirubin. Bilirubin can be easily tackled, avoidable also, and it has been proven in Western countries the incidence of kernicterus is almost nil in US, but for an occasional case due to non-hemolytic etiology. I'll come to that later on. But asphyxia still happens. It's a real situation even everywhere. Not Only in LMIC it also happens in developing countries. So move on. This is kernicterus, tetrad of kernicterus listed here, and ictal staining of the basal ganglia, yellow staining. Right, here, if those of you who haven't seen Opisthotonus tonus retrocolis, here is it. See it? Retrocolis, Opisthotonus, tonum nomentis. I told you, once you see this and prove that it is really indeed, then chronic encephalopathy is almost 100% correlation. I will describe this baby in the next few slides. My personal experience, this baby, a baby who is arching the back while on phototherapy, is a very bad sign. I don't want to see this sign in my life, and I will not accept if it was a preventable thing. I don't want to see. I don't want to hear from any one of you or doctors who are working for me that this baby has doing this. This mischief is not good for the baby, and it should not be even talking about this condition in a good neonatal unit, given the therapies which are available and the intervention charts. People have researched into this in US, rigorous implementation of the policies of bilirubin. In UK, they attacked the surgeons, attacked the prolonged jaundice part, yellow campaign. That led to a massive fall in the infantile cirrhosis and hepatocellular failure due to cholestatic jaundice. US hemolytic jaundice and the starvation jaundice. Those who discharge, 6 hours discharge, early discharge, go to community without proper separation or lactation support, come back with serious jaundice. That's idiopathic hyperbilirubinemia that can and has led to occasional cases of chronic biliary encephalopathy or kernicterus. And that's the only reason for kernicterus in US kernicterus registry in these days. So I have seen 2 times in the past 22 years of clinical experience post qualifications. But I want to be true Gandhian in this. I don't want to hear, see, or even talk about this. I'll talk more about this baby. This is the last case seen in my clinical practice in 2014 in India. It's a referred case from outside. I cannot blame the clinician here because there's a known setting. Mother B negative, baby is O positive, and anti-D, this is gravida 2. And anti-D had been received in the first pregnancy. We'll suspect it. And ICD test has been done. It was also negative. And this baby was born through Meconistein lichen, complicating. Understand? So here someone noticed yellow staining, and initially it was dismissed as Meconistein staining because cord also was stained. But despite that, as a second opinion, someone called the junior doctor says that it's still baby looks yellow. Then do you see a bilirubin? At those days, I don't think TCB was regularly available in the setup we are working in India. TCB is quite recent concept, transcutaneous bilirubin. All right, and people are comfortable using transcutaneous bilirubinometer only recently. I have discussed this in the phototherapy measures for estimation of serum bilirubin. Please go through that. The recorded videos available in my channel. Hemoglobin is 8.5. This is very clear. See, the baby who looks pale is in serious danger. A jaundice baby should not look pale. The first day jaundice means the hemolysis is progressing very fast. Once I saw the when you see the bilirubin 18 hours 23, that is an exchange, but this is even more serious indication 8.5. This baby definitely needs an exchange to remove all those antibodies because cannot be managed with the immunoglobulin or any alternate treatments. So when you are arranging for the exchange transfusion, is the vigintophobia. 18 will jump to 20, even first stage jaundice and 23 hours. So this was a definite vigintophobia we all had, and it happened. Officer Tonus Retrocolis. I was following this baby. I was doing a proper tone assessment in my own hands, documenting on the file. Officer Tonus Retrocolis lasted for 5 days and then recovers. Doesn't mean that baby will escape the sequelae, because going by the clinical experience, once this is documented and you've seen it, I have followed through cases. This will disappear. Tone abnormality will disappear. Baby will appear completely normal. Sunsetting sign was that it went off a 10th day. This is natural progression of this sequence. And baby will absolutely normal. It's like a honeymoon. Oh, baby is all right. So, but this is a final. If the baby received a cochlear implant 1 year of age. Why did it happen? Baby was looking normal. The parents were very happy. I did give them a guarded prognosis that we need to follow up this baby. I had observed certain signs which are definite serious concerns to me. You have to review. Please don't avoid follow-up visits. Come to that. So the follow-up of the case, a 3 months follow-up, baby was not reacting to the sound. You have to do the sound localization and the sound recognition in these babies. Cochleopalpable reflex was absent, and with guarded prognosis that I already maintained since I saw that sign, I referred for brainstem auditory evoked response. I'm insisting this because this baby received a cochlear implant at 1 year of life, because we need to follow these babies. And then the universal hearing loss screening program is there, baby screening, not adult. That's because we can help these babies. Early recognition is needed because we have something to offer for these babies, including cochlear transplant for sensory neural deafness. Available in Chennai, India. So here is it. This is someone is able to read. I was able to read this. There's a history in that because it says someone read that as normal. I said it cannot be normal. I wanted a second opinion because I saw this is see, this is the auditory brainstem evoked response. We get to a stimulus, sound stimulus, brainstem as through the cochlear nerve, hearing electrical signals. There are 5 waves which can happen. 1, 2, 3. You can see there are 5 waves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only thing is the latency is the peak amplitude is decreased, and the sound hits amplitude should be high, like sound frequency is down there, and the latency is 1 to 5 latency. Time lag slow. Conduction is very slow because the signal itself is weak or non-existent. So the latency is between the peak latency, between all the peaks. See the peaks are there, the dips are there, 1, 3, 5, and the amplitudes of these individual waves both should be there. So the second opinion given by a senior person of this Bera. So wave 5 was not obtained even at 100 decibels of both ears. This is because wave 5 is the one which happens in the cortical level, the topmost level. So once that is not there, means it's not reaching, the signals are not reaching them. So wave 5 not obtained. So bilateral severe to profound hearing loss of both the ears for 3 months. So from that time we have to prepare the baby for cochlear implant, referral process, insurance, money, and getting the correct implant. So now let's move on. So the vigitophobia, if you see one case and follow up this case and see the unfortunate state of the baby and the parents and the caregivers, then you will also obviously have this, at least vigito anxiety, not phobia, at least you have that anxiety. Right. Indications for acute transfusion in a jaundice setting are the appropriate threshold levels as suggested by, I follow NICE charts in all my units I work. This is National Institute of Clinical Excellence from UK. Because good thing is it's specific for each gestation and it can be affixed to the file. You can it's an Excel sheet. You can just type in the gestation. The graphs will be generated. In fact, you can plot the points also. And I have modified this to such an extent that I plot transcutaneous bilirubin, serum bilirubin, as well as gas bilirubin. 3 bilirubins I check, not one. Everything will be cross-checked. So at any age, a total bilirubin level 25 or above is for exchange transfusion. This is proposed by Butoni et al. I was telling in US A great effort was done to avoid kernicterus due to hemolytic jaundice. This was led by Butani and Meisel, both together. So near-miss events in the Sigma approach proposed by Butani et al. He wanted to enforce aviation safety standards, not ordinary industry, aluminum industry or other industry standards. You are on a flight, you have to be very safe. So to do faster also. So the aviation safety standards approach was proposed by Bhutani. You read his article, very interesting articles on jaundice. And he was the one who introduced these hour-specific nomograms for bilirubin that will hopefully eliminate all the cases that are currently happening due to starvation or breast milk inadequacy jaundice. That happens after discharge. Right. The warning, I said falling hemoglobin hematocrit is a very serious sign, more serious than the bilirubin can be brought down. But if there is questions of severe anemia or pallor due to hemolysis, that means there's an antibody low is so high that either baby will receive a top-up transfusion many times in the follow-up, or the hemolysis will just keep on happening. So avoid that. People suggest early exchange transfusion is better when you see a pale baby. So rapid incremental rise of bilirubin around 0.5 milligram per liter, or micromole milligram per percent, or micromole per liter per hour despite phototherapy. Any clinical signs of acute bilirubin encephalopathy, or nowadays you get bedside BERA, the normal hearing test meters. You can be able to get quantitative, not qualitative ones, quantitative ones with the waveforms analysis. So that if you have, then at any stage you have any early neurotoxic sign, I said, remember, high pitch cry is the only uh, reliable sign without much intra-observer variability. Have you ever heard an high pitch cry, the shrill cry, irritable brain? Please have this mind. That is an early sign of bilirubin encephalopathy, and don't allow any baby to go in for the florid features of tone abnormalities, opisthotonus and retrocolis, right? Okay. Here is the nice chart that displays the values of intervention for the time-specific bilirubins that we get. And this is a variable here, gestation. I told you we can choose a gestation by typing, and you can print out for the Excel sheet for a particular gestation. And as I previously explained in the previous channel, this divergence is very narrow between these levels of phototherapy, need for phototherapy, and the exchange time is very narrow. Almost if you have within the first day, you see the splaying is very minimal. After that, the splaying gets more, and after the third day, after 7 hours of life only, the levels of intervention are steady, and there is a gap which is constant gap maintained, which means in effect that the more serious risk time zone is in the first 72 hours in all the babies. And I already told you most of the cases of kernicterus or chronic bilirubin encephalopathy, in fact the term kernicterus is a tetrad, is described as a sequelae of bilirubin insult to the brain more than 35 weeks of gestation only. I presume that preterm babies also suffer high bilirubin, but there is no specific clinical pattern that is recognized in the follow-up that is specific only for bilirubin insult, because they are vulnerable to many insults in addition to bilirubin. That might be the reason. Kernicterus as such is a specific clinical pattern and a sequelae that is described in relation to the more mature babies, especially those more than 35 weeks of gestation, who had clinical signs compatible with acute bilirubin encephalopathy, especially tone abnormalities, and later ending up as kernicterus. The tetrad of kernicterus, please go back and remember it. So action of bilirubin levels is important, and this is medical legal because you need to monitor bilirubin, document and act upon. If you do a test, you have to act upon that. So essential things you can enter here, monitor. That's one. To the next slide. So what an exchange transfusion achieve? It brings down the bilirubin levels very rapidly and definitively. As I told, you have a crippling villain like bilirubin, and you have a hurry to act upon that. Your time is very limited. Once it enters and gets bound to the ganglia, it's difficult to remove. Once it is fixed, difficult to remove. Previously, people are thinking it's a reversible thing. Once it gets fixed to a tissue, the brain tissue, bilirubin to leach out of the fixed tissue is not possible. It's highly impossible. There are no techniques to do that at this point of time. So I already told you first the importance of recognizing anemia as a clinical marker because intravenous immunoglobulin has come. So there are some instances where you can avoid the exchange transfusion also. But in spite of that, the hemoglobin is low. This might require a top-up transfusion once or many times in the follow-up. So people effectively suggest an exchange transfusion will eliminate or obviate the need for packed cell transfusions during the follow-up. Anemia that happens as a sequel of hemolytic jaundice. That's one of the reasons that folate is regularly prescribed for all babies with hemolytic jaundice. From discharge until we are sure that hemolysis has stopped completely and hemoglobin is steady, at least until 6 weeks, I would say, sometimes 3 months also. So it removes the circulating antibodies causing hemolysis. That's also a major thing. Toxins. Previously, the proponents of exchange transfusion always held that it's not only the bilirubin, there might be other toxins also which are responsible for the neurotoxicity of the bilirubin. I mean, it's unidentified toxins, which is not only this unbound bilirubin, there may be other forms of bilirubin also. I come to that interesting thing later because American Pediatric recommends that we need to take the total bilirubin as the decision making point. You have a nice chart also. It is the total bilirubin, not only the unconjugated bilirubin. Understand? It's a total bilirubin, not the unconjugated bilirubin, because this area was there, it was contested vigorously. Exchange transfusion was favored for many years. In some units with the process in favor of exchange transfusion, phototherapy cannot enter. Exchange transfusion, when you see a pathology jaundice, was the norm. So these are three reasons why an exchange transfusion is preferred. And because the risk of bloodborne diseases is almost eliminated and it's safe to proceed with exchange transfusion, you should not be hesitant in asking or ordering an exchange transfusion when there is a real identified need and a decision as suggested by the charts. Nice charts or US-based charts. So exchange transfusion in NSU, there's a vanishing skill levels because I told you because of advent of high intensity phototherapy as well as immunoglobulins and IV immunoglobulin as prophylaxis against exchange transfusion, not against jaundice. It has already happened. So in developing countries, exchange transfusion is a developed countries is a procedure that is rarely required, and hence current trainees often lack adequate hands-on experience. So the trainees may be jittery because the procedure is like a surgery. You're going to remove the blood at least 2 times, the whole volume of blood, and you're infusing fresh blood. It's a major action. It's a major. It's not a simple procedure. It's a major procedure. But in low middle income countries like South Africa and Nigeria, exchange transfusion is so commonly performed even these days. In this paper 1920 is from Turkey as well. In 2020, not 1920, from 2020 from Turkey as well, that says exchange transfusion is still routinely performed. 1 to 2% of all live births out of 100 babies born in a unit 1 to 2% of babies will require exchange transfusion. It's such a common procedure in some parts of the world, South Africa and Nigeria. Might argue that these levels can be brought with adequate screening and infrastructure, but still this is the real statistics, and lack of patients for exchange transfusions babies means the trainees in the developed countries, they often don't have adequate hands-on experience. Right. So I'll come to my one personal experience. We studied in India, the Apex institutions, and we went through proper training pathway for neonatology after graduating in pediatrics. This is from my own logbook. I got a copy of that recently. These are the procedures performed. Actually, 122. The metropsy within 3 years. The last year was research project. So within 2 years, you would say 122 exchange transfusions. We start exchange. The first year 6 months you leave. So from the almost in, I would say from 1 year or 15 months, we get 122, which in effect means around 10 in a month for one DM student. Right. So these are the statistics of those period. So this is, I said, this is a hands-on experience. My procedure logbook from DM neonatology. I will, yes. Okay. And then I have not lost the skill of exchange transmission, because you say that still it's I am having, there are many babies who receive exchange transfusions. At least I think 22 exchange transfusions in the last decade. This recently in Dubai also I performed exchange transfusion for ABO incompatibility in 2018. It's me performed exchange transfusion in all the things happen in neonatology ICU to night only, 2 a.m. in the night. This was for a baby day 1. Jaundice creeping up, and I don't use this umbilical artery and the vein. I don't touch the artery unnecessarily because of the complication rates. I can very safely perform using umbilical vein itself, because uh, used to that, quite used to that, and without any serious morbidities as well. So this on a Friday, which was a holiday in Dubai, we had saved this baby on those days. 2018, that's recent, that's 2018. I think yes, that was the after that there is one more exchange time. This is 2019. There is another exchange time patient. Next. So it's a blood bank procedures. Getting arranged blood bank procedures. How do you do the exchange transfusion? It's a double volume exchange transfusion. You know, the blood volume of the baby is 80 ml per kilo. So into 2 times 160 ml per kilo. Baby 3 means it's 480. So you need at least 480 or more, means 1 bag or more. Normally many big babies you need 2 bags. So the blood volume should be compared. The blood should be cross-matched to the baby as well as the mother's blood. For isoimmunization, Rh negative blood cross-matched against maternal blood and ABO group, either of the baby or O group, ORH negative. For ABO isoimmunization, ideal will be O positive packed erythrocytes suspended in AB plasma, because ORBG doesn't have antigens and AB plasma doesn't have antibodies. Understand? So we don't have any antibodies, and babies they remain whatever residual antibodies that are they fail to remove by the exchange transfusion cannot attack the A or B antigens of the baby, because we are replacing them to O erythrocytes. That's the ideal one, or just O positive blood. And if that is also not available, you have to do exchange transfusion anyway. We have to remove the antibodies at least. So, or that anything matching the baby's blood group, in that order we prefer. So mostly it's performed with O positive blood, because getting that O positive erythrocyte suspended in AB plasma, it's most often difficult. At the times we require those exchange transfusions at odd hours for the laboratory or the blood bank. So recently collected blood samples are better, because hemolysis and current blood bank techniques suggest that the preservatives used are very good. They don't lead to hyperkalemia due to hemolysis. RBCs are preserved. Their membranes are preserved without any damage. So, even then, it's preferably a fresh blood, less than 2 days old blood, obviously tested and serologically tested and compatible blood. Irradiated blood, people are using whether there is a possibility because it avoids the graft versus host reaction. Sometimes these lymphocytes in the transfused blood, they will play some mischief with the baby, and it can manifest as some skin reactions, allergic reactions like that. So irradiation is all the preterm babies, irradiation recommended. Other reason is that the CME, cytomegalovirus elimination is achieved by irradiation. And some unknown antibodies in babies who are requiring repeated platelet transfusions. Irradiate of the platelet concentration is important. So irradiation helps in many ways. Next. So the techniques of doing exchange transfusion, I told you, I prefer umbilical vein only. Wherever umbilical vein can be accessed, means up to 9th-10th day I can easily access the umbilical vein. After that, if I cannot perform supraumbilical cut down, then I go by peripheral artery venous exchange. Or there are contraindications for umbilical vein cannulation, then I go for peripheral artery venous exchange. Umbilical vein, umbilical artery, I don't know why you should candidate umbilical artery in a term baby just for doing exchange transfusions. The complication rate of umbilical artery is so high, and the consequences can be crippling. Crippling, I will say, because gangrene of peripheries. So that some units prefer umbilical vein and umbilical artery together for doing exchange transfusions because the logic will be might be the hemodynamic flex push and pull will cause more problems than one side push, other side pull. That may be the logic, but I will not allow the umbilical artery to be touched or cannulated just for the purpose of the exchange transfusion, because these babies, I already told you, they are very mature babies. So unless you're doing exchange for another reason or in addition to bilirubin, especially a preterm baby who already has gotten UAC for other purposes, then you can use it. But just for the purpose of exchange transfusion, I don't see a justification personally from my experience. So peripheral artery and the vein. So I'm supporting personnel for monitoring, recording, etc. As I told you, I had two exchange transfusions done in Dubai. One was that one, umbilical vein. The other one was a difficult one, and umbilical vein was already attempted many times and went off. So I came as a consultant and I did peripheral artery venous exchange was needed. It went well. So the peripheral artery, getting peripheral artery dorsalis pedis or so do the Allen's test. I just go through my blood sampling videos. I would have done all the sampling techniques, including peripheral artery stamps and cannulation. Everything is explained very well there. I mean, a supporting personnel as well. It's not that you do the exchange transfusion all alone without any support. Monitoring is important. Recording is very important because you have to document the volume that's being taken away and volume that's being injected, so that volume overloads can be dangerous. Sometimes we intentionally give some top-up transfusions to avoid falling hemoglobin. So it's nowadays I don't give any calcium or bicarbonate to unless we have a proof that some disturbances are happening. I just do the exchange, push and pull. Aliquots, I don't exceed 10 ml in any baby. And I finish the exchange within at about an hour from the start of the procedure. Arrangement is difficult. After arrangement, after cannulate, the procedure itself will be done in 50 minutes to 60 minutes. Complications of exchange transfusions, these were all reported in literature. For my side, I've seen occasional thrombocytopenia and nothing of the other sorts in this recent experience. Apnea mechanical ventilation is discussed very well in literature. And in mechanical ventilation, one of the African studies says almost 20% of the babies after exchange transfusion needed intubation ventilation. Personal experiences. Okay, thrombocytopenia is described in some studies as 40%, but it just recovers by itself. This is because of probably there is some not recent blood, slightly older blood that is already deficient in platelets. Hypercalcemia was described in previously with blood banks which are not using the currently available good preservatives. Necrotic enterocolitis is sometimes described because of the risk of the splanchnic circulation, intestinal circulation that gets disturbed by the push-pull hemodynamics. But no causal association was really found in any case. Mortality is described in 4% mortality. 4% in those babies were exchange time is very 1 to 2% of babies. In that 4% of the transfused babies means 4 in 100 babies who are transfused could still die. So this is a risk which has to be explained to the parent, and this has to be put in writing also. Right, but I presume that these were for situations not exclusively for jaundice. It's not very well evident why 4% mortality, but it is still there. Mortality can happen. So conclusions and narrations of exchange transfusion: don't allow any baby to arch unnecessarily or it's for the any baby who arches in the for the please to examine thoroughly. And rule of Deathorn abnormalities, hypotonia is a very serious sign. Never mistake this. If you document this sign and it is proven, it is going to have a serious impact on this baby for the entire life. That is kernicterus. So that message for the phobia or at least anxiety should be there when the levels of bilirubin or in the level exceeding the phototherapy nearing the range of exchange transfusion. Be prepared. So right, just to conclusion, exchange transfusion is rarely performed in the Western world because of, I already told you, intensive phototherapy RH immunoglobulin protocols, even antenatal immunoglobulin or RH immunoglobulin, even 500 units or before they're giving 300 or 500 units straight, and Hava specific bilirubin nanograms. The odd case of kernicterus that are reported in USA from 2004 are not of hemolytic etiology anymore and are due to the inadequacy of breast milk, the so-called starvation jaundice. It's not breast milk jaundice. Breast milk jaundice comes in prolonged jaundice group. That's due to some factors, but this is early jaundice, hemolysis, unconjugated jaundice, starvation jaundice. We suffered so much weight loss because of adequate lactation support or even with support due to ignorance. This could still happens, starvation jaundice. So this is an interesting question. People have forgotten this, like what really is the neurotoxic equivalent is indirect bilirubin as measured by the current techniques, the diazo technique. Is it the real virulent free bilirubin? Free is anything which is not bound to albumin. So is that the only fraction remaining or many other fractions? People have done HPLC, high performance decay chromatography, Japanese performers. They did this to identify what is the bronze baby pigment, which is bilifusin. Bilifusin, lumirubin. So it's called bilifusin. It has got specific characteristic in the spectrophotometry. So still after this, the research was happening. What is free bilirubin many years ago? Salicylate binding index, which was used to identify or quantify in vivo the free bilirubin percentage. But with the advent of this indirect even transcutaneous meters and transcranial bilirubinometry techniques, people have lost interest in analyzing these basics. What is free bilirubin? So it's just that we have to, in indirect hyperbilirubinemia, the definition of which the conjugated fraction should not exceed 20% of the total bilirubin. That's a indirect hyperbilirubinemia. And indirect hyperbilirubinemia is the one which we treat with phototherapy. So, but when we treat that, the nomogram, all treatment decisions are based upon total bilirubin. That is probably because the 20% matters. The 20% also matters. So this is that gray area. I presume there's a gray area which was left in the consensus guidelines. Conjugated bilirubin, unconjugated bilirubin definition is unconjugated bilirubin. Hyperbilirubinemia definition is conjugated bilirubin less than 20% of the total. But we should take the total bilirubin only in the consideration for any treatment decisions of phototherapy or exchange transfusions. This should be understanding that should not say that I saw the unconjugated bilirubin, but it was below the phototherapy range, below the exchange transfusion range. No, the decisions of exchange transfusion are always based upon the total serum bilirubin. This is AAP, NICE guidelines. All guidelines re-insist this. Don't forget, bilirubin is a crippling neurologic equivalent, the unconjugated bilirubin or the free bilirubin part. And exchange transfusion is the definitive proven methodology that eliminates the risk of kernicterus in babies who are on the verge of going in for neurotoxicity. With those words, I complete this presentation. Thank you, and please follow my on the YouTube NeoG Heal Their Babies. I already saw the link on the front page. This has this for core neonatologists or those who are serious interest in neonatology. It has got procedure videos, and this is a series on jaundice, which I am concluding. Part 4 of the jaundice series. There is earlier on blood sampling techniques, and there are some procedure videos of minimally surfactant therapy, the ways I did that all are available on this channel. Many focused videos I am planning to do on specific topics which will be interest to the people who have core interest in neonatology. Those words. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is the concluding part of neonatal jaundice series, exchange transfusion for neonatal jaundice.